you would, go ahead and take your seats. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Good to see everybody. I feel like I'm going 90 miles an hour this morning for some reason. It's good to see everybody. Well, and that's appropriate too, because we're doing Remember the Sabbath today. We're going to talk about rest. If you're visiting, welcome to this morning's Bible study. Glad to have you. I understand that not everybody in here has been to every single one of our classes, and that's okay. I'm going to do a brief review this morning. But what this class is a study of the Ten Commandments. We're calling it 10 words. The Ten Commandments was referred to as the Decalogue by the Greeks, and essentially it's translated 10 words, 10 sayings, words of wisdom. And here we are in our class schedule. Today we're going over Remember the Sabbath, and we've covered no other gods before me, no graven images, and do not take the Lord's name in vain. I did want to say on the outset that I approach this material humbly, knowing that the more I've gone through it, we taught this for the young adults class, we quickly realized that this is absolutely a fundamentals course for Christians in every single way. It's a fundamentals class. And so what we're doing is we're presenting material about if you're a new Christian or you're new to the Bible, or if you're a Christian and you're trying to get back to the basics in 2023, this is a great place to start. Because at Mount Sinai, God has millions of Israelites gathered at the base of the mountain. And as we discussed in our introductory class, He is using this as the opportunity. This is the moment that He is asking His people to come back and be His children, have a separate identity. And He's going to reveal Himself, and He does reveal Himself, through these first 10 commandments. And so in a fundamentals class, why is it appropriate for us to study this today? Well, this is a difficult age to live in, I would submit. Yeah, ask yourself as we're going through this material, what does it mean to be a Christian today? The world certainly has a viewpoint. The world certainly has their own set of morals. And that's why it's important to go back to the basics. What does it mean for us to be a Christian today? If you're new to the Bible and studying, that can be a tough question. Where do I even start? If you want to seek out Christ and God, where would you even begin? How do I transform my life? We hear this talk about the transformative power of the Word of God. Well, how? Where do I go? Where do I start? And so that's why we've used this analogy or metaphor about the Bible as a map that's orienting your life towards God, towards Christ, back to Eden when things were perfect, forward to heaven when we pass from this life. It's no coincidence that when Christ was delivering the Sermon on the Mount, and He wanted to bring a revolutionary message to people, and it was revolutionary, that He started with the 10 Commandments, if you read through the Sermon on the Mount. He's referencing back to the Sermon on the Mount, or rather, in the Sermon on the Mount, He's referencing back to the 10 Commandments. He's going back to the beginning. Okay? And the spiritual implications therein. So the first one, we're going to do a little bit of a review, which I think will be good for us. The first commandment we talked about was no other gods before me. That block you see sitting there represents the metaphor that I used in our intro class, and that I want you to imagine God as a sculptor slapping a mold of clay down on a table. And as He gives the 10 commandments, He's going to mold the image of what it looks like to be a child of God. Commandment by commandment, like building blocks, He's going to form the brow line, the ears, the eyes, the mouth. What does a child of God even look like? Well, it starts there. Don't have any other gods before me. This is the first and foundational commandment. You could think of it also like building a house. This is the foundation. Upon everything else, everything resides on this. He starts by saying, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt. I'm your creator. I'm your liberator. And we as Christians today reflect on the same thing. He says, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of slavery, bondage to sin. I brought you into the promised land, gave you a hope of heaven. Very important. And so by starting with no other gods before me, this revolutionary idea, this monotheistic religion where God is the creator, He is your liberator, we're reorienting our lives back to Eden, back to Christ, back to heaven. Giving a new identity as well. Once again, set apart with a divine purpose. Remember we talked about in the Garden of Eden, there was a purpose. Man had a purpose with God. It was perfect. There was perfection. We had a relationship with God, and we lost that when man sinned. And so this is the moment where He says, you're going to be my children. If you keep these commandments, I will bless you. This is the starting point. No other gods before me. And you see it in the New Testament. Matthew 22, verse 33, when Jesus was asked, what is the most important commandment? What is the greatest commandment? Dan? You're right. Love God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. I think in the Old Testament it says with all your strength. Jesus quotes this. What's the greatest one? Start with number 1. No other gods before me. You have to love them. Before entering the promised land, there were these warnings. Teach them diligently to your sons. Talk of them. That is the law of God. When you sit down in your house, when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise up. Essentially, every moment of every day, remember that I'm your creator, I'm your liberator, and I love you. And that's the most beautiful thing. We know as Christians, reading the Epistle of John and elsewhere, that God is love. God is love. That's how you transform your life. So then we go to no graven images. It says no idols. Don't make for yourself a graven image. Which on its face was very important to the Israelites because idolatry was a popular thing at this time. But drilling deeper, well, let's just start here. Why not make idols? Because God can't be contained. He's omnipotent. He's omnipresent. He's omniscient. He knows all. He's everywhere. He's all-powerful. And what's more, He's not revealed through some image that man can create. Interesting enough, God chose to reveal Himself through His Word. The word graven image that word graven is the same word used for graven tablets. Essentially, the words themselves are graven. And so this idea is He's appealing to man's intellect through word. Where's the transformative power? Bringing a sacrifice to an idol and laying it at its feet and hoping for the presence to be there for you and give you favor? No, the transformative power is through man's intellect. The words come into your heart. They transform your life. They change how you behave in every single way. They change how you interact with your family, interact with your friends, interact at work, what your whole purpose is, and then His beauty is made animate through our lives. That's why it's so important not to have any graven images. God says in Genesis 1, He says, let us make man in our image according to our likeness. Man is the image bearer of God. What a beautiful and profound thing. And again, this is revolutionary. This God, our Creator, says, I made you in my image, male and female. This divine purpose as image bearers and instruments of God. We reflect His light and love through our actions. Colossians 2:9 says, for in Him all the fullness of deity dwells in bodily form. That is Christ. He was the perfect image bearer. He was the ultimate image bearer. And yet, ironically, in Isaiah 53, it says He had no stately form or majesty that we should look upon Him, nor appearance that we should look upon Him. So how is it that Christ was the image bearer, the perfect image bearer of God? Well, I would submit that He was the perfect manifestation of love. And this is what I remind myself. We're talking about reorienting our lives back to God. I think we overcomplicate things sometimes. And it is complicated, can be. But we do that to ourselves introspectively, where we say, like, what's my purpose? Am I living up to my purpose? I'm worthless. I'm not doing anything right. I think John mentioned it in a previous invitation or something. We think about like these grand gestures we should be doing. feeding the poor, doing this. And those are great. And then you see Christ's life, and it's like in every little minuscule thing he did, that's how he was serving. That's how he was the perfect image bearer of God, was a life of service and selflessness. It's a beautiful thing. And so you see those are building blocks. This is what's going to shape you into the image of God. We talked about do not take the Lord's name in vain. Now that I have you, now that you're going to be my people, don't do it in vain. My name is holy. Don't take false oaths. In Leviticus we see that they were offering human sacrifices in his name and mishandling of holy gifts, blaspheming God's name, prophesying falsely. The idea is do it purposefully and also honor me because I am set apart and I am holy. And so instead, use the name of God for that which is good, in reverence and respect, giving him the credit that is due, protecting his name, wearing it with honor and purpose. Okay? And so then we come to remember the Sabbath, which is one of our final, what I would say, fundamental blocks before we move into the interrelational, interpersonal stuff. It's like these are the foundational things that you need to be and master before you even go out into the world, so to speak. And those are my words, sort of paraphrasing. You need to get these things down, and then you're going to have a relationship with your family, your mom and dad, your brother. Do not hate, do not murder. Your wife, your marriage, no adultery. Do not steal, your community, what is your purpose there. And so it's going to get into how you treat each other, but all of that is predicated on the first four. And remember, the Sabbath is pretty important. Okay, so let's read Exodus chapter 20, verses 8 through 11. Exodus chapter 20, verses 8 through 11. It reads, "Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath of the Lord your God. In it you shall not do any work. You or your son or your daughter, your male or your female servant, or your cattle or your sojourner who stays with you. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea and all that is in them, and rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath and made it holy." So, I know I've given a lecture to start the class, but I do want to take a moment, quickly, maybe 2 minutes, privately reflect, or if you have the courage, talk to your neighbor about what is the significance of this commandment for the Israelites, and how does it serve to shape the image of God in our hearts? What's the purpose? So think about it privately, and maybe whisper to your neighbor, and then we'll have a little conversation. Okay, get my mic passers. In the context of sort of the thesis of this class, that this is God revealing himself to his people and molding the image of a child of God, of who that would be, to reorient ourselves back to Eden in that perfection. What is the significance of this for him to say, hey, remember the Sabbath? Don't work on this day. We're going to get into this as we go, but let's have a discussion on this. What do y'all think? Steve?
Worship on the Sabbath was holy and perpetual. It was something that should carry forward. My mother just made a comment that I was just thinking about when you asked the question, so I wasn't paying attention to you. I was paying attention to her. But what she said she said, while they were in Egypt, they really were idolatrous. And maybe they didn't worship much of anything except that which would be, in fact, they were very immoral in their worship. So when God saved them, we get to the point where the command is given, it's not too far to understand the fact that they would be involved in idol worship at that time too. So
yeah,
I think it's, and then I think there's a connection, David, between the Sabbath command and our command to remember the first day of the week, and I'm sure you'll touch on that.
One second, Jordan, because
me and Terry were talking about he wanted the Israelites to concentrate on hymns to worrying about things of what they were doing, work and stuff like that, to more emphasis on God and to serve Him.
Take a day, focus on me. I've just told you no other gods before me, no graven images, and that your life has purpose. You're my image bearer. My name is holy. That which you do is holy. Now take a day and pause. Robert, then Jordan.
Yeah, so Dan stole the first one I had, focus, but that's okay. Focus, and then the second one was frequency. So we took it down to a weekly basis to say, you shall focus on me every week so that you will never forget me.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. I actually wrote that in my margin. It's not in my notes, just kind of pencil whipped down. But I feel like God didn't set us up to fail. And He was realistic about the world that we live in. And this idea of a repetitive day that's completely set apart to reflect on the things we're going to discuss, but on Him, essentially. I mean, aren't we so distracted by the world? I mean, I am. Not even like in a bad way. You may be distracted by the sins and vices of the world, but then there's just, there's bills, there's work, there's kids, there's dishes, there's laundry, there's whatever. You just kind of get caught up in it sometime. You just feel tired. I'm tired. I actually am tired. My kids have me tired. I'm feeling this. Actually, I told Robert, I said, it's not really that I feel hypocritical, but this is just heavy stuff to teach when you don't feel like you're the image bearer of this. But God was intentional in saying we need the day. All right, Jordan. Sorry.
No, that's good. So you already alluded to this. So one, this takes us back to creation. So there's a pattern here. You think about the year of Jubilee, you think about man in the wilderness, so all these things are connected, I think. But maybe the biggest thing in my mind, why this is significant, is this is the thing that would make the Israelites very, very different than everyone else. Not everyone was idolatrous in ancient days and whatnot, and so on and so forth. So to me, of the four we've already talked about this far, this is the first one that people would have a noticeable difference, that they are not like us, in this sense anyway.
Yeah, and the links that they went to there, absolutely. Harrison, and then we're going to move on.
He set up a pattern so that if we followed that pattern, we could succeed.
I agreed. Yeah, that's kind of like what I was saying. He didn't set us up to fail. He knew we'd need this day. You need it. You need a reminder. It's almost like he's battling the devil, and this is Satan's domain, and he knows, I'm going to equip you guys with something pretty special. You're going to need this. Because imagine if we didn't have a day to reflect.
David.
Okay, one more.
Thank you. I just wanted to say that there's a summary of what this commandment means later in Exodus. But before I say that, love is very intentional. You have to think about, like with my wife, I have to think about how I'm going to love her, how I'm going to spend time with her. Sometimes I have to schedule that time, right, because the world is so busy. So you take this back to your relationship with the Lord. In Exodus 31, and the Lord said to Moses,
don't read that.
Come on, man.
I've got a whole slide for it, and it's actually like the cornerstone of 10 slides.
All right, well, let me just say that
and I'm 15 minutes behind.
God realizes that we need to schedule time with Him. Like, He's telling us that I desire this, and if you're going to make this happen, there needs to be a scheduled time for us to do this. So I'm just thinking practically, like, with all the craziness of the world, we need to schedule our time with God. Like, we have to be intentional about it, just in the same way that we love our wives or we love our husbands or we love our kids. We don't always have the time for that, and we have to plan for it.
We're going to get into that in depth. Thank you, Ian. Absolutely, thank you. I didn't want to cut you off, but we are going to do exactly what you said, so we're on the same page. I do want to just add in here, I didn't add in a kicker slide at the end to say, let's talk about all the New Testament applications or parallels, because we do that in most of these classes. The idea here is as we move along, I wanted it to kind of be organically into, as we talk about the Israelites, we discuss also how it applies to us. And it sounds to me like we're all well aware that this applies to us, even though we don't worship the Sabbath. And I feel like Christians do something, we do something interesting with this commandment. We undermine it in many ways. In one sense, we say, oh, the Pharisees didn't understand the Sabbath day whatsoever, right? Why? Because they were really focused on what the Sabbath was. It was a day, and you didn't do this, and don't do this. You're separated from God, a holy God, if you do this. They missed the spiritual application of it. So we do that, which is a nuanced, intellectual, good understanding of how the Pharisees misunderstood. And then for us, we go, but we don't recognize the Sabbath because we don't worship on Saturdays and do that stuff. We don't take a break on Saturdays. Therefore, it's done away with. And that's not true. Why do we do that? Why is it physical? Well, we're almost doing what the Pharisees did. All those spiritual implications that the Pharisees miss are embedded into the modern day Christianity. There's New Testament verses we'll go over, hopefully, that show us it's applicable to us today, and it's eternal. So, as we discussed, it's a day to remember and reflect. And we're talking about reorienting ourselves back to Eden. We're going to go back and we're going to think about our relationship between God and man. Think about the original purpose of man in God's creation. Think about how we were perfect, how God's creation was perfect. But now He's inviting us back to Him to partake in that perfection, that relationship, and that renewed purpose. It's a day of physical and spiritual rest, of spiritual growth, and a sign of God's covenant. Okay, so here's the verse Ian was mentioning. Later in Exodus chapter 31, verse 12, it reads, "The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, But as for you, speak to the sons of Israel, saying, You shall surely observe my Sabbaths, for this is a sign between me and you throughout your generations, that you may know that I am the Lord who sanctifies you. Therefore you are to observe the Sabbath, for it is holy to you. Everyone who profanes it shall surely be put to death, for whoever does any work on it, that person shall be cut off from among his people. For 6 days work may have been done, but on the seventh day there is a Sabbath of complete rest, holy to the Lord. Whoever does any work on the Sabbath day shall surely be put to death. So the sons of Israel shall observe the Sabbath to celebrate the Sabbath throughout their generations as a perpetual covenant. This is a sign between me and the sons of Israel forever. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, but on the seventh day He ceased from labor and was refreshed." So let's focus in. We're going to hop around within here, but this middle 2 verses. You shall observe the Sabbath, for it is holy to you. Everyone who profanes it shall surely be put to death. Then it references, if anyone works, that person shall be cut off. And then it references creation. For in 6 days work may be done, but on the seventh day there is a Sabbath of complete rest, emphasizing this rest, holy to the Lord. Let's talk about that for a moment. Physical rest and healing. First off, the Sabbath, I submit, is a gift by God to His people. Keep in mind that the Israelites are fresh out of Egypt. They spent 435 years in captivity, defining their self-worth by the toil of their hands. And upon liberation, God gave the Sabbath, to remind them that their value comes from Him and Him alone, which is a consistent theme. Your value comes from me. Imagine the mindset and the psyche of somebody who just left Egypt. First off, whatever generation came out of Egypt knew no other life whatsoever. That was all they knew, was bondage, was labor, was a burdensome master who didn't care for them. So how do you define your self-worth in a society like that? Well, unfortunately, you're about as worth as much as you can produce based on your toil. There's your value. And God says, I liberated you from that. Take this day to reflect and rest. You're not going to work anymore. You're going to pause. Because why? You're not working. Because you're going to remember that I'm the one who gives you value, not the toil of your hands. Which is a good lesson for us, consequently. It's a reminder of our purpose. God is the one who gives you life and sets you apart. And I think when we talk about, hey, I get really distracted in this world and everything that's going on, this is kind of what we're referring to. your brain subconsciously, even if it's not at the forefront of your brain, it's in the deep crevices of your subconscious, just get caught up in the worries of life thinking things are so important. God gives us value. It's not simply a cessation of work, but fruitless work from the bondage, from bondage. A day of refreshment. Stop, reflect, remember. So we are running way behind, and I apologize for that. But I will say, this is a discussion point I brought up, but I'm gonna work through it. What sort of things would the Israelites and us meditate and pray on during this day of rest? Well, first I would submit that they're going to think about creation. So remember, reflect on creation. We've hit that point home ad nauseum. When I created everything, it was perfect. You had a purpose. We had a relationship. Remember that on this day. Remember, freedom from slavery and bondage. Exodus 20, verse 2 through 7. I'm your God who brought you out of the land of Canaan, out of the land of Egypt. Your rest is only obtained when God delivers his people from bondage and set them apart as his chosen race, a holy creation made in his image. Why is this applicable to us today? Because there's all sorts of things and people telling us you're going to have rest and you're going to have happiness and you're going to have joy if you do X, Y, Z. God here is saying, stop and remember, I'm the one who gives you rest. I'm the one who gives you purpose. God is in control. They would reflect that, hey, all power and authority belongs to God. Trust that God will provide, and all that we have is from God. Man's authority in this world is given, and humans are stewards of God's creation, and so therefore we give thanks for our blessings. And we care for and strengthen the Spirit. All things we do on the Lord's Day, as Steve mentioned, coincidentally. In this perpetual Sabbath that we reside in as Christians of rest. This study, digging deeper, will make you, and I actually didn't make it, Steve, part of my thesis. If this were like a 2-part or 3-part class, we would have gotten deeper into it. I didn't try to compel you that the Lord's Day is some the Sabbath was something very specific to the Israelites. There are spiritual implications that apply to us. But nonetheless, this study will make you want to make the Lord's Day more intentional, without a doubt, as a pause. There's a meaning behind it. If there was a meaning for them, there's a meaning for us, to pause. I encourage you to read this book by Abraham Joshua Heschel. If nothing else, read the foreword and then set it on your nightstand with all the other books you were reading. But the foreword is great. Actually, the first 3 chapters. He writes, this is a Jewish author. I think he's a rabbi, but it's excellent. It was written in the middle of the 20th century. It says, he who wants to enter the holiness of the day must first lay down the profanity of clattering commerce, of being yoked to toil. He must go away from the screech of dissonant days, from the nervousness and fury of acquisitiveness and the betrayal and embezzling his own life. He must say farewell to manual work and learn to understand that the world has already been created and will survive without the help of man. 6 days a week we wrestle with the world, wringing profit from the earth. On the Sabbath, we especially care for the seed of eternity planted in the soul. The world has our hands, but our soul belongs to someone else. 6 days a week we seek to dominate the world. On the 7th day, we try to dominate the self. Oh, that was well written. Okay, this last verse here. It is a sign between me and the sons of Israel forever. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, but on the 7th day he ceased from labor and was refreshed. Steve.
But wasn't the Pentecost the first fruit of the harvest in anticipation of the full harvest? And of course, with that, you have to understand that the full harvest is the gospel of Jesus Christ. Am I on the right track there?
Yeah, but I mean, I haven't deep dived it, so you're gonna have to ask Broadwell for that off the cuff.
What it is that you're saying. I think it's important for us to understand the significance of the Sabbath in that regard. And it may be Jordan knows.
That was an easy answer. No. So maybe just quickly, David, because I think what you just mentioned is spot on. We try to make parallels, I think, between the Sabbath and like our day of worship. And while I do think there are some similarities and some principles, as you mentioned, I don't think it's quite a direct correlation like we see like examples in the Old Testament, like the Passover lamb. That's a direct correlation where this one doesn't seem as much. To me, when I think about the Sabbath, Jesus says he's the Lord of the Sabbath. And in Matthew, Jesus talks about, come to me and I will give rest, and so on and so forth. So in one sense, the Sabbath is something we are still looking forward to, is this rest we'll have with Jesus for all this. So I guess what I'm saying in a rambling way is, yes, I think some principles are there that we could take for our day of worship, but maybe not the direct correlation some people try to make it today.
Yeah, and that's kind of why I didn't try to shoehorn that point in, where I think it's kind of the low-hanging fruit. You may think as you're going through all these, you're drawing these like lines of parallels to the New Testament. The parallel to me is all of the, it's not the Sabbath is parallel to this, it's the list of all the things that are embedded in the Sabbath. That's what I meant by the Pharisees got it wrong. And all those things that go into the Sabbath are applicative to our lives today. But what you would argue is every day of the week, right? But nonetheless, we do have the Lord's Day that's set aside. And so I'm not shoehorning that point in, except to say, it may make you want to be more intentional with your meditation, your prayer, your setting aside the cares of the world on this day. I would love for my children to know that that's important. Because it's not just like a Sunday's our nap day sort of thing. It's this intentionality about it. And the same with God. Because I made that point, we'll work through this one. This similarity between God's rest in creation and man's rest in the Sabbath, there is a direct parallel there that's referenced. And so when God rested, remember, he said it was very good after creation, which means it was perfect. So his rest was this positive, active appreciation and satisfaction in his finished creative work. Did the bell ring? Okay. So everything was perfect. He rested. So how is man's rest correlated to that? Why is man told to rest and then reflect on creation? What about Christians and our rest that we get from our salvation? How is our rest correlated to God's rest on creation? There are two rules as a teacher. You never ask a question that's too easy. People are afraid to answer. They don't want to sound stupid. You never ask a question that's too hard. Or you don't ask dumb questions. Terry?
Taking stock in the Lord and what he means, if we don't do in this case, we normally do it on Sunday, but if we don't take the Sabbath as the rest, we let our work and the ways of the world get to us, and we lose it all. We don't consider our ways and his ways. We don't spend the time with him that we should.
Yeah, I think that's where that gift part is. This is a gift. Take a moment. Take a breath. It's been a long week. You have value because I give it to you. I'm your liberator. You have purpose. Dwell on these things. H.E.
I think we do the same thing that God did. He looked at what he had done. We need to look back at what we've done throughout that week and how we have maybe praised God, how we've given it back to God, and we make that reflection back on who he was and how he has blessed us.
Yeah.
We got one over here.
Okay, John.
Maybe you're going to hit on this, but when Jesus healed on the Sabbath and everyone was so mad at him, what was the opposite of it was very good? To leave this man ailing and hurting. And there is no reprieve. There is no, as you said, liberation. And that's what they missed here, right? And when Christ said, Sabbath is not for God, but for man, that's what he's saying is the Sabbath is to bring recovery. And that's what God did on the seventh day as well.
Yeah, great point, H.E. and John. I put, Derek.
I feel like God wants to have a relationship with us, and so also He's our example, and by setting the Sabbath day aside, it's a way that we can fellowship with Him, and also like the point that you said, reflecting back throughout the week. That's awesome. I think it was just another way of God being an example, and also having another way for us to fellowship with Him and share with Him that day.
Yeah. You think about how the Israelites, we said they would be focused on or maybe meditating during the day on their captivity and liberation from that. Well, think about the spiritual implications of that. There is some benefit in us prayerfully meditating on what our lives were like before we came to know God. Because the devil is setting up traps for us to go back to the world or slip back into certain vices. And for me, there is a benefit in reflecting. So your brain is going through this exercise. What kind of man was I before I became a Christian? Where was my life oriented compass-wise? Was I a rudderless ship? Did I serve a purpose? Did I bless people? Did I make lives better? Were my words seasoned and intentional in blessing and helping and praying for others? Or you reflect on how dark it was. I mean, if any of you guys have sinned or come from a life of sin, you know that it's sad and there's anxiety and stress and like inner turmoil. That's the captivity in Egypt. And that's what God liberates us from. And I think that's something we focus on today. Ian?
Yeah, I'll just make another point in regards to this question. This is, by the way, this discussion on the Sabbath is so deep. I believe there's just an unnumbered amount of reasons why this is good. But another one for me is just a reminder of how easy it is to get your purpose, to feel good about your work, right? You get caught up in like, oh, this is my calling, this is my purpose, I'm good at this. I'm here because I'm a good accountant, or I'm a good carpenter, or I'm a good whatever, fill in the blank. And you derive your purpose, a sense of purpose from that. And God is saying, like, I just did all these things over the 6 days. It's not to feel good about the work I did. It wasn't for me. It was for you. And we have to have that same outlook towards God. Like, I do all this work, and it may give me a sense of purpose, but that's not why, right? It's not for me. It's for God.
Amen. Yeah, if these were foundational leading into the others, then this is the moment where you say, no other gods, no graven image, life of purpose. Remember, I'm holy. Now stop. Remember who you are. Remember our relationship. Remember that purpose. Reflect on it. Put the cares of the world aside. Trust. I mean, that's something I didn't hit like very hard in this one, but it's all about trust. Because in order to stop working, you have to trust God. And so then you move forward into the rest of the commandments, giving your life fully to Him of a wholly different transformative purpose. In every single way, it will permeate every facet of your life and how you do everything. But you have to start with these. I think that was the second bell, right? Okay, so Hebrews 4. Just wanted to read that real quick. Hebrews 4. I'm not going to read verses 1 through 11, though you may in your private study. Essentially talking about the imperfect Sabbath and then the perfect eternal Sabbath. In verse 9, it starts talking about, for indeed, in verse 2, we have had good news preached to us, just as they also did. But the word they heard did not profit them, because it was not united by faith in those who heard. And it goes down into verse 10, or verse 9, it says, so there remains a Sabbath rest for the people of God. There remains a Sabbath rest for the people of God. For the one who has entered his rest, that is Christ, has himself also rested from his works as God did from his. Therefore, let us be diligent to enter that rest, so that no one will fall through following the same example of disobedience. There's a rest that we get on this earth from being a child of God. And I think you hear, maybe, I grew up in the Church of Christ, born and raised. And so maybe I feel more comfortable making this observation. But you hear a lot of Christians will say these things, and I hate this comment. And I think they think it's predicated in humility. But they'll say, I just don't know if I'm going to heaven. We'll see, and I hope. I think the idea is, I feel so broken and imperfect. I'm not worthy. That's true. We all feel that way. But you can't go into the Sabbath trusting in God, remembering creation, remembering the covenant as an eternal pact, saying, this is my covenant with you, if you also doubt his word that he saved you from your sins through his Son, through the blood of his Son who died on the cross. So it's not Calvinistic to say, I have confidence in my salvation through the blood of Christ. It would be to say, I can go on sinning so that grace may abound. That's wrong. But it's not Calvinistic for Christians to say, on this day and every day, I am at rest and I am at peace. How do you have peace if you don't even think you're going to heaven? I would wake up every day worried. The peace we get on the Sabbath is because you actually let go of it. And you say, I have a spiritual purpose, not a physical purpose. How do you even say that if you don't think you're going to heaven? There's no peace. It's turmoil. You're just no different than the world. What it becomes is religion. It becomes religion. The Pharisees did that. I hope I make it. I don't know if I will. If you feel that way, that may be your conscience telling you you need to tap into the blood of Christ and do his grace and pursue righteousness with everything you do. And so, man, I didn't mean to get like preachy there at the end, but goodness, it's like it just, that thing just fires me up because God, you undermine the cross. Christ died for us. His blood was shed for us. And then we say, I don't know if it'll work. What? What are we doing here? It will. It works. It is working. Your life. You are saved. Be baptized. Believe in God. Be baptized up there. You are washed in the blood and you are risen with him anew. And you can have that peace on this eternal Sabbath, trusting in God. All right, that's it.